Believe it or not, the best way to make cross cuts on boards is on your table saw, not your miter saw. That's what your miter gauge is used for. But it'll work best if you attach an auxiliary fence first and square it up with the miter gauge slot. Once you have your fence attached, square it up using the miter gauge slot and a combination square. Just loosen up the set screw, square it up, and tighten the set screw again. After I attached the fence, I made a pass through the saw blade to create this kerf. And once that kerf is there, you can use it to register your cutoff marks on any board that you're going to cut. Never ever use just the fence to cross-cut boards to length, or you're sure to get injured from a kickback, but there is a way to do it safely. This block of wood is exactly 1 inch thick. Clamp it to your fence well behind the blade. Then set the saw to cut 1 inch longer than the length you're after to account for the thickness of the block. Since the fence is no longer trapping boards against the blade, you can safely cut as many boards as you want to exactly the same length every time. There's nothing like sliding wood through a table saw with zero effort. If your saw table's in pretty good shape, it's easy to make that happen with a little elbow grease and wax in just a few minutes. Clean off any deposits or rusty spots with a Scotch-Brite pad and a razor. Scrub down the writing surfaces of the fence guide as well. Apply a liberal coating of paste wax to all the surfaces, the table, the fence guide strips, and even the fence itself. Polish the surfaces with a cotton cloth and you'll be amazed at how much easier wood glides through that saw of yours. Cross-cutting wide panels on a table saw is easy if you build a table saw sled like this one. But if you have narrower panels to cut, there's an easier way just by buying a second miter gauge to go with your first one. Loosen the set screw on the gauges and screw a board to the back of both. The board will automatically square up both gauges, then tighten them back up. Make a pass through the board to establish a saw kerf. Align the cut mark of the panel with the saw kerf and make your cut. You can buy a second miter gauge for about 25 bucks and skip building a sled altogether. But if you'd like to build a sled, go to familyhandyman.com and enter table saw sled. You'll find a few different versions there. Cutting narrow strips like this is hard to do on a table saw because the guard prevents you from getting close enough to the fence. But there is a way to do it by using a simple jig like this. Cut a notch in the jig and leave a little push block at the bottom that's wider than the strip that you want to cut. Make the jig about 1 foot wide and as long as you need your strips to be. When you're ripping really narrow strips, cover the throat plate slot with masking tape and raise the blade through the tape. That'll prevent strips from getting between the throat and the plate. Then cut the push block to exactly the width of the strips you wish to cut using the table saw. Rest the board against the jig and just push it through. You can make as many perfect strips as you need with this technique. You can't cut materials like thin plexiglass veneers or even plastic laminate on a table saw because they'll just slide underneath the fence while you're making the cut, unless you build a simple jig for the job. Attach a fence to the bed of a flat piece of sheet good with glue and nails. Now there's no space anymore for the thin material to work under. Adjust the table saw fence to rip the width you're after and don't forget to allow for the thickness of the jig's fence. Then send the jig partway through to the far side of the blade and clamp it in place. Now you're ready to cut the material. Now this was just a small piece of P-lam, so I only needed a small jig. Build a bigger one for bigger material. The principles are the same. If you're still using your tape measure to set the table saw fence because you don't trust the scale, you're wasting a lot of time. Take the time to adjust the scale so it's accurate and you'll learn to trust it. Use a board of a known width like this 1x6, which is exactly 5.5 inches wide. Hold it so it barely kisses the side of a tooth when the fence is locked in place. Then set the hairline on the scale to exactly 5.5 inches. Tighten it up, and from now on you can trust your scale whatever the width it is you're cutting.